Jasmine Crockett stuns Kash Patel on live TV with a savage comeback, audience left in shock. The studio lights burned bright, cameras rolled, and millions of Americans tuned into what was supposed to be just another fiery political debate. But what happened that night would spark conversations far beyond politics. It would touch on kindness, humanity, and the power of compassion in a world desperate for it. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat across from Kash Patel, a former White House official. Both had reputations for being sharp, quick, and unapologetically bold. The air was charged before a single word was spoken. Congresswoman Crockett, Patel began with a smirk. Maybe if you spent less time complaining and more time working, your district wouldn't be struggling so much. The audience gasped. The words cut deep, not because of their sharpness, but because they echoed a familiar sting, the kind of dismissal that so many people, especially women of color, had heard in workplaces, schools, and communities all their lives. For a moment, Jasmine paused. She could have lashed out. She could have fought fire with fire. But instead, she leaned in, her voice steady and clear. "Mr. Patel," she said, "it's easy to point fingers when you've never had to live the reality of the people I represent. My district doesn't need pity. It needs opportunity. And maybe if leaders like you stopped treating compassion as weakness, we'd all be better off." The room erupted in applause. Patel shifted uncomfortably, his smirk fading. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned directly to the audience. "Do you know what real strength looks like? It's not in mocking, it's not in belittling. Real strength is a grandmother raising her grandchildren after losing her daughter to addiction. Real strength is a young man working 2 jobs while still going to college at night. Real strength is people who, despite being overlooked, keep showing up every single day, hoping someone in power will finally see them." The applause turned into a standing ovation. Even those who came expecting a political brawl suddenly found themselves wiping away tears. But then came the twist. Because Patel, clearly shaken, did something unexpected. He didn't fire back with another insult. Instead, his voice softened. "You know, you're right," he admitted, almost in a whisper. "I've spent so much time fighting for a side, I forgot what it means to fight for people. Maybe I needed to hear that." The studio fell silent. This wasn't the exchange anyone expected. For once, it wasn't about who won the debate, but about what had just been unlocked, a shared humanity. After the cameras stopped rolling, witnesses said Patel actually approached Jasmine backstage. Instead of continuing their sparring, he asked about the families she'd spoken of, about the struggles in her district. It wasn't a full transformation, but it was a beginning. And that's what made the moment historic. Because sometimes, the most savage comeback isn't a sharp insult, it's speaking truth with such grace and courage that it cuts deeper than any jab ever could. It disarms hate, not with anger, but with undeniable humanity. In the days that followed, clips of the exchange went viral across the US, the UK, and Canada. But more than the headlines and the hashtags, what people remembered most was the message: kindness is not weakness, kindness is power. And in a world too often divided, that reminder stunned everyone into a new kind of hope. Positive closing message: when voices rise above insult and choose compassion instead, walls can crumble, hearts can shift, and even the fiercest opponents can discover common ground. Continuation. Jasmine Crockett stuns Kash Patel on live TV with a savage comeback. Audience left in shock. The clip didn't just stay on television. Within hours, it was everywhere, across social media feeds, on late-night talk shows, and even on radio stations where callers couldn't stop replaying the moment. People described it as electric, real, and a breath of fresh air in a toxic climate. And here's why it struck such a nerve. You see, in today's world, people are tired. Tired of insults. Tired of political theater. Tired of leaders treating each other like enemies instead of fellow human beings. But when Jasmine chose compassion instead of venom, it lit a spark that many thought had gone out in public life. One viral comment under the video said, "She didn't just win an argument. She reminded us of what we could be." Another wrote, "For the first time in years, I watched 2 political figures talk to each other like people. It gave me hope." But perhaps the most powerful reaction didn't come online. It came from a single mother in Detroit. She wrote a letter that Jasmine later read aloud during a town hall. The letter said, "I watched you last night with my teenage daughter. She asked me why you didn't yell back when you had every right to. I told her, because sometimes, showing strength means choosing peace. Thank you for giving my daughter a new role model." When Jasmine read those words, she paused. Her voice broke just slightly as she said, This is why we keep fighting. Not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for families like hers." And then something even more surprising happened. Kash Patel, yes, the same man who had thrown the first jab, sent his own letter. It wasn't to the press. It wasn't a statement drafted by a PR team. It was handwritten, addressed directly to Jasmine. It read, "You challenged me in a way I didn't expect. For too long, I've seen compassion as weakness. But maybe I was wrong. I don't know what the road ahead looks like, but I'd like to walk at least a small part of it differently. Thank you for reminding me what really matters." Jasmine didn't share the letter to boast. She shared it because it proved something powerful. When we choose kindness over cruelty, it doesn't just protect us from bitterness. It has the power to transform even those who least expect it. Now, of course, not every critic was convinced. Some people dismissed Patel's words as political theater. Others said Jasmine's approach was too soft. But here's the truth. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, strength is found in restraint. Sometimes, it's the quiet courage to stay rooted in humanity, even when provoked. And the ripple effects of that night kept spreading. Schools played the clip in classrooms. Churches and community centers used it in sermons and workshops about empathy. In the UK and Canada, newspapers ran headlines like, "A debate clip that gave the world hope." Think about that. A single moment on live TV, just a few minutes of choosing compassion, echoed across oceans. Because here's what we so often forget. Politics aside, race aside, ideology aside, people everywhere hunger for the same thing. Respect, dignity, a reminder that we're not just opponents, but neighbors. And in the end, Jasmine's savage comeback wasn't savage at all in the way we usually define it. It was savage because it cut through the noise. It shattered the expectation that power only comes through anger. It proved that compassion, spoken with courage, can leave an entire audience, and even an opponent, speechless. So the next time you feel like the world is pushing you to snap back, to hurl the insult, to match venom with venom, remember this story. Remember Jasmine Crockett on that stage. Remember Kash Patel's unexpected change of heart. Remember the single mother's letter. And her daughter learning that true strength is often gentle. Because if kindness can stun an entire audience into silence, if it can soften the heart of an opponent live on national television, then maybe, just maybe, it can heal a divided world, one moment at a time. Final uplifting closing for narration. So let's carry that forward. Let's choose words that heal, not wound. Let's wield compassion like the powerful weapon it truly is. Because in the end, kindness is not weakness. Kindness is the fiercest strength of all. Continuation. Jasmine Crockett stuns Kash Patel on live TV with a savage comeback, audience left in shock. The days after the debate felt different. Not because politics suddenly changed overnight, but because millions of ordinary people were reminded that change is possible. In coffee shops across America, people who normally avoided political conversations found themselves saying, "Did you see that clip?" Strangers at bus stops pulled out their phones to show it to each other. Teachers in classrooms paused their lessons to talk about it. It was no longer just about Jasmine Crockett or Kash Patel. It became about us, about what we are capable of when we choose empathy over ego. And that's the thing about moments like this, they ripple far beyond the stage. One man from Toronto wrote in a local paper, "I've been cynical for years, but when I watched that exchange, I saw what leadership can look like. Not winning, not humiliating, lifting." A teenager in London stitched the clip on TikTok with her own caption, "Strength doesn't always yell. Sometimes it whispers the truth." And in Houston, a retired veteran said, "That reminded me of the people I served with. Different colors, different beliefs, but when it came down to it, we all had each other's backs." See, what Jasmine did that night wasn't just about politics. It was about reclaiming something we've all been missing. The belief that respect can exist even in disagreement. And here's where the twist deepens. Weeks later, at a charity event, quiet, off camera, Jasmine and Patel crossed paths again. No microphones, no lights, just two people in the same room. Witnesses say Patel walked over to her with no entourage, no defensiveness, and simply said, "I've been thinking about what you said. I don't know if I'll ever fully agree with your politics, but I'd like to work with you on something that matters." And to everyone's surprise, Jasmine smiled and said, "Then let's start with kids. Because if we can't agree on giving children a better chance, then what's the point of any of this?" That single handshake, small, quiet, unseen by cameras, was the real shocker. Because here's the truth. Real change rarely begins on stages. It begins in small conversations, in moments of humility, in decisions to see each other not as enemies but as human beings. And maybe that's the lesson we can all carry. That the most powerful comeback is not always the loudest. That the greatest strength is not about domination, but about dignity. That the real victories are not in debates, but in the hearts we move closer to hope. So if you're listening to this story right now, here's the challenge. The next time you're in a heated argument, pause. The next time someone insults you, breathe. The next time you feel like lashing out, ask yourself, what if kindness is my greatest weapon? Because Jasmine Crockett proved something unforgettable that night, kindness doesn't just silence the room. It can shock an entire nation into remembering who we really are. And if that's not power, what is? One final closing for narration. So let's not wait for leaders or debates to remind us. Let's start right where we are. At home, at work, with friends, with strangers. Because if one moment of compassion on live television could ripple across 3 countries, imagine what millions of moments, yours, mine, ours, could do for the world. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is our greatest strength. And it's time we start using it. Continuation. Jasmine Crockett stuns Kash Patel on live TV with a savage comeback. Audience left in shock. Weeks later, something remarkable happened. At a youth leadership summit in Chicago, Jasmine Crockett was scheduled to speak about resilience and hope. To everyone's surprise, Kash Patel showed up too, not as a guest of honor, not as a headline speaker, but quietly, in the back of the room. When Jasmine finished her talk, the moderator asked if anyone in the audience had a question. Kash stood up. The room froze. Phones lifted instantly. But what he said stunned the crowd all over again. "I came here today," he began, voice unsteady, "not to argue, not to debate, but to admit something. I've spent years fighting battles for power. But that night on TV, Jasmine reminded me that the real fight is for people. I'm not here as her opponent. I'm here as a man who's trying to learn." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief, then broke into applause. Not because Patel had switched sides, but because humility is rare, and everyone in that room felt the weight of it. Jasmine stepped forward, met him halfway, and extended her hand. But instead of the sharp, staged handshake people expected, she pulled him into a brief, genuine embrace. The cameras flashed, the crowd roared, and at that moment, it wasn't about red or blue, left or right. It was about something much bigger. The belief that hearts can change, and when they do, whole communities can heal. That night, news anchors across the US, the UK, and Canada replayed the clip. Not with the usual cynical commentary, but with something different in their tone, hope. A Canadian broadcaster said, "For once, politics gave us a moment of humanity instead of division." A British journalist remarked, "This is what leadership should look like, fierce in principle, gentle in spirit." And in America, one headline read, "From insult to inspiration, how a debate sparked a movement of kindness." Because here's the truth. People are hungry for examples that prove we are more alike than different. Hungry for reminders that courage doesn't mean crushing your opponent, it means lifting up humanity, even when it's hard. And maybe that's why this story still matters. Because if compassion could turn an insult into an ovation, if it could turn an opponent into a partner, then it can turn our divisions into bridges, too. One final full circle closing message for narration. So wherever you are listening, whether you're in America, the UK, Canada, or anywhere in the world, carry this with you. The next time life dares you to strike back, surprise it. The next time someone throws an insult, answer with truth and dignity. The next time you wonder if kindness makes a difference, remember this story. Because kindness doesn't just change the moment. It changes people. It changes communities. It changes the world. And if one night, on one stage, two people could remind millions of that truth, imagine what could happen if each of us lived it, every single day. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is the greatest strength we have.